Today's episode, I have with me Scott Savage. How you doing, Scott?
Hey, it's good to reconnect, Eric. It's been a long time since we were together and hosting an event in Phoenix in a very different season of
Yes, it
ministry for
was.
you and me. But I'm grateful for how long you've been serving and just your continual desire to be reaching people the church has a hard time reaching and being able to do whatever it takes to get there.
Well, you're kind to say that. Yes, it was the peppermint-filled pinatas book tour. You hosted
Yes.
us there.
Yes.
It was so much fun. In fact, I don't know if I told you this since then, but anytime I go through Phoenix, I try to stop at the same coffee shop you introduced to me all those years ago.
Yep. Yep. I think I
Uh,
think that I think that was Lux Coffee Bar. It is one of
that's
the best
right.
spots in Phoenix. So
That's exactly right. Well, I wanted to talk with you. You've got this great start over guide I want to get to. But first, let's talk about ministry these last several years. You're a pastor there in Arizona, a purplish state.
hmm
I would love to just hear from you as church leaders may be listening in similar spaces, trying to figure out how to move forward. But maybe describe your experience these last few years leading a church there in Prescott.
Yeah, I mean, I would say anybody who's been leading in any environment over the last few years probably has some scars to show for it. And if you stayed in it, you probably have had to either do some really intense work or you're in need of doing some really intense work because of what happened. We're definitely a part of that. We were meeting in rented space in March of 2020. And so on a Thursday afternoon, we got a text message, hey, we're going to be closing down the venue. And so we went online and then they reopened up for a short period with lots of restrictions that made it feel not like church. And then about 6 weeks later, they were like, hey, we don't have liability insurance to cover us if somebody gets sick. So you got to go online again. And so we ended up staying longer, closed longer than any church in our community. And ultimately, they had to relocate to a different venue. And so we just took some major hits in terms of our attendance. When the church came back together, it looked nothing like the church we'd had before. And through that, we saw some staff that just as God was leading them, they moved on to new opportunities. So I went on sabbatical this summer for my first sabbatical ever, and that was almost 3 years to the day to when we went through that first shutdown. And I just realized in that period that I had a lot to grieve. Terry Wardle famously says ministry is a series of ungrieved losses. And I just had not grieved my losses. And I don't think I even had counted my losses. I don't think I really had just sat back and said, okay, what have I really been through? And what I realized is because I hadn't counted those losses and I hadn't grieved those losses, those were showing up in my life and in my ministry. And so for me and for our team, it's just been paying attention to what's going on underneath the surface. Obviously, leading a new church to start over and begin in a new season is challenging, but it's as challenging to do the work on yourself so that you're a healthy leader, so you can lead from that healthy place as opposed to leading from a place of ungrieved losses.
Yeah. Well, I love that you got to take that sabbatical. We were talking a little bit before. I also had a sabbatical this summer, although yours was 3 months. I would love to for you to describe what makes a good sabbatical. Maybe there's a church leader out there that has this on the horizon. What made your experience a good one? What are some advice you'd want to give? Mine was 2 months. I certainly had some great experiences as well, but talk a little bit about yours. What is some advice you would give to someone about taking a sabbatical?
Yeah, I mean, luckily for me, when I came to this church 7 years ago, they already had a sabbatical policy. So every pastor, every 6 years, got a sabbatical. The lengths varied based upon the nature of your role. But I think so often sabbaticals happen in one of two situations: either something bad has happened, and it's like a punitive sabbatical. We're sending you away almost as punishment to deal with whatever happened, or it's reactionary. You have a leader who's in a really unhealthy place and like, hey, we're going to try to save you with a sabbatical. And sometimes you can't avoid one of those outcomes. I just think it is so good to have a proactive sabbatical policy for your team to go, hey, we really care about this staff. You may not be able to pay your staff as much as you would like for them, but if you can build in a proactive sabbatical policy that communicates to the team you have and the team you want to recruit that you care about their health. When it comes to the actual sabbatical, I think building it months in advance is really helpful. So I started planning mine somewhere between 6 and 8 months in advance, making the team aware that I was doing it. That gave me a chance to schedule all the guest speakers, start identifying a list of all the things I was carrying, figuring out who I was going to hand things off to. And then about 3 to 4 months ahead, I let the church know this was coming. So they got used to the idea. And then, just tons of communication, over communication, lots of written plans, lots of backup plans, and really specific, this is when you would call me and pull me off of a sabbatical. And then here's a way to deal with everything else. And so for me, I feel like I really planned well. And it led to a really good situation that the church saw they can survive without me, and the team had a chance to really rise up in some really cool ways, and the church and the rest of the team saw some of the capabilities and competencies of our staff that they probably wouldn't have seen if I was in the picture. So overall, it was not only a win for me, for my health, for my family, for my marriage, for my future ministry, it was a win for the church. And I came back and I felt that. I heard that from the staff and the elders and the body.
That's fantastic. I've gotten really positive feedback about how I'm showing up since I got back. I think before I left, there was a bit of frenetic trying to get everything done, working too many hours, messaging people at odd times. But I also think that one of the things that was really good for me was I kind of had the first month of travel, which to me is very rejuvenating. For some people, that might be, actually wear them out. But for me, getting to go on these trips, some on my own, some with family, was really helpful. And then I had about a month of being at the house, and my wife is working. My kids are both young adults. So, I had 25 days this time where it was me deciding what to do. And really, I thought of it as I had 40 hours a week to spend with God. Once a month, we were encouraged to have a solitude day. That's 8 hours reading the scriptures, praying, going on walks, journaling. And this time I really tried to think of it as 40 hours a week, with God. That's my full-time job. Still can be a dad and a husband, after hours, so to speak. But, one thing I would have done differently, I loved how you did a great job of communicating. I don't think I did as good of a job communicating, kind of, not that it was coming, but that, here's what I'm going to be doing while I'm gone. And I think that was hard for some people, because 5 years ago, I went offline. Like, I pretended it was 1992. This time I was still online because I wanted to do the research while we were in Greece and Turkey. I wanted to be able to share with family and friends what we were doing. And so I think I just didn't set expectations right. But another thing I recommend to pastors, as you described, kind of who's going to replace me while I'm gone. This next time around, 5 years from now, I'm going to have whoever's going to replace me while I'm gone replace me for the month leading up to it. And that way they're getting the feel of it. They're able to ask me lots of questions before I actually disappear for those 2 months. But I loved that you got that time. Love that it was really rejuvenating for you. Talk about, for a moment, the Start Over Guide. What was the origin of this, and what is some of the insights you're sharing with us that we can learn from?
So I ended up writing this resource when I was on sabbatical. And I didn't go into sabbatical with pressure from my church or from myself that I had to like come out of it with something. Because I think sometimes when you go into sabbatical, there's either an internal or an external pressure. You got to prove that it was worth it. But I'm a writer. I've been writing online since 2008. And I started working on this. It's an idea I started just noodling on in my free time while I had it, and I wasn't writing sermons. And what ended up happening was I created this resource to be able to help people learn from the past and make the most of their future. And I think I was unaware as I was doing it that I really needed this myself. So I got to the end of my sabbatical. I had 2 weeks to go. a friend of mine texted me, said, "Hey, are you excited to come back?" And I went to type yes, and I couldn't type yes.
Mhm.
And I was like, I'm not excited. And he said, "Well, do you want to be a pastor still?" And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There's a big gap between I'm not excited to go back and I want a different career. But what I realized is that I needed what the Start Over guide kind of walks you through. And so I ended up doing it over 3 days, walking through this workbook as if I was somebody who wasn't the author of it. And what it did was it really helps me to process the past, because I think we tend to make the past very black and white. If what we're starting over from is great, we're really sad, we're grieving, we're nostalgic. And if it was terrible, we go, "Hey, get me out of here," and the baby goes out with the bathwater. But for me, in my experience, most times are a mixed bag. They're like a chicken wing where there's good meat and then there's bones, and you have to piece through to find the wins and the lessons from the hurts and the disappointments. And so the Start Over guide really helps you to make the most of the past and really pull those lessons out and celebrate those victories, while then kind of processing through the hurts and then looking ahead to go, "Hey, with God, if Ephesians 3:20 is true, the best is always to come. God is always doing something new. He's always capable of doing more than you can imagine. So how do you begin to dream again?" And I think some people have a hard time starting over because the past was bad, and some people
Mhm.
have a hard time starting over because the past was good. And my hope is the resource is helpful for people in both situations and really sets them up for what's
Yeah,
coming next.
that's great. TheStartOverGuide.com. Highly recommend heading over there. What are some of the questions you try to answer? I remember, why is it so hard to start over? Why is it so hard to change? Talk a little bit about those two in particular.
Yeah, I think for some people it's so hard to start over because they haven't yet really celebrated the good from the past. And I think sometimes it's hard to leave behind something that's really bad because you're still attached to it. And so sometimes that's celebrating, "Hey, there were really good things there. It wasn't all bad. You're not a failure." Sometimes it's going, "Hey, I've got some stuff I have to forgive, some hurts that I'm still attached to the past with." And sometimes it's going, "Hey, that was really good, and I want to acknowledge that, but the best days are not just in your rearview
Mm,
mirror."
mm,
And I think sometimes people think starting over is always a problem for people who have bad things, but I've found sometimes people have a hard time starting over because they're leaving behind what they don't really want to leave behind. Maybe
yeah.
they're leaving a job that was great and they're moving to a new job. And they're like, am I going to have friends like I did back there? Am I going to be as
Mm,
successful as I was in that? And so the question of why is it so hard to start over, I think is answered as we walk through those first few kind of modules there. I think it's also hard because I think we don't often think about individually the things that we end up doing kind of organizationally. So most
mm,
churches, most businesses, there's some sort of scorecard.
mm,
There's some sort of metric of how am I doing? You know if you're winning or if you're losing. And that
mm,
could be even just as crass in church world as attendance, or in business as revenue, a profit loss statement. But we don't think about that for our personal lives. Like what makes your life successful?
mm,
And so one of the stages in the workbook is to establish a scoreboard, to say, "Hey, how am I keeping score in life? What does it mean to win? What does it mean to lose?" And I love what Michael Hyatt says in his book, Win at Work and Succeed at Life, that there really should be a double win. You want to succeed in your career, but you also want to succeed in your family and in your life outside of work. And if you win at one and fail at the other, you fail. And so how do we find a way to have an assessment for our lives, especially as believers, that's in light of eternal things, to really measure that? And sometimes we're sad to leave something behind or sad to move into something that's new because we're not even measuring life well, or
mm.
understanding how we're doing. And so this workbook is a chance for you to really ask some hard questions of yourself.
I love it. Well, we've given over 100 books away, different books from friends of mine or my own this fall, and we're going to give away a copy of your book to the first person that emails me whenever the newsletter comes out, eric@ericbryant.org. If you're not getting the newsletter, you can sign up for it at ericbryant.org.
It
Scott, I
it
love,
works. It works
yes,
because I've won a book earlier this year. So I just
that's
wanted to tell
right.
people it actually can happen. You can be fast and get it.
That's right. Well, thank you for the work on this book. I know that pastors, church leaders hearing you, I hope they're encouraged. This idea of reflecting, slowing down, grieving, These are not normal traits in our hustle and bustle kind of world, but I think it's critical. You know, this setting aside time each day with God, setting aside time each month for prolonged silence, solitude, those are things that are just so critical. I wonder, there's other things I know you've been writing that have gone viral on Relevant Magazine. Like if someone's interested in your work, where can they find what you're writing?
Yeah, you can just go to scottsavagelive.com. That's the central place for, the work that I'm doing. There's a page on there called offerings that has my newest and latest free and very inexpensive resources. And I would just encourage people, like, we're heading into a season that can easily be like the most frantic season of the year for pastors. The holidays, are often incredibly busy in our families and incredibly busy at church. But what I've found is whether it's that week in between Christmas and New Year's, or those random times where you find a hole in your schedule, what the world really needs from us is not people who are always up to date on what is trending or what is happening. The world doesn't need us to be people who have hot takes on every controversy or, fight that's happening, online or in the news. We need to be people who are deeply grounded in the scriptures. We need to be people who are reflective and self-aware of our own issues. And we need to be people who are bringing our true selves to our work. And so hopefully the Start Over Guide arrives for people as they're kind of leaving one year behind and starting a new year. And hopefully it's a reminder that we need to remember that we are called to be a certain kind of voice. We don't want to just be an
Mm,
echo of talking heads on social media or cable news. We need to be people who are bringing a very countercultural and refreshing voice. I read a book every year, Eric. It's called In the Name of Jesus by Henry Now, and it came out
mm,
almost 35 years ago. And Nowen talks about the temptations of Jesus in that book. And the first
mm,
one is the temptation to be relevant. And I don't think relevant is necessarily a bad thing. You mentioned I write for Relevant Magazine. I don't think it's a bad thing in and of itself, but sometimes we feel a temptation as pastors and leaders in a very post-Christian world to be relevant. And that can lead us into some unhealthy paths. And hopefully this season will remind us that Jesus came to be near us, that Jesus comes and he's present among us, and Jesus is really enough to lean on and preach and cling to in
mm.
this challenging time.
Love it. Scott, thanks for what you're doing. Keep up the great work there in Prescott. And thanks for investing in all of us through your writing.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. Thanks for this show. I really enjoy the people you have on in the episodes, and I really love the hope you have that in a post-Christian world, leaders and churches can make a real impact and difference. So thanks for investing in us, Eric.